My story is just like all of you. The reason why you're here, it's for a most horrible, terrible reason. And that is that your furry loved one has a disease. And this disease, for most of us, might be osteosarcoma. At least that's what it was for Ranger. He was just shy of 7 years old back in 2019 and came up limping after chasing a ball. I thought it was just a normal injury. It ended up being diagnosed as osteosarcoma. So, as all of you, you're searching every way that you can. He had 4 rounds of carboplatin. He had his leg removed. It was a front right leg removed. And after that, those 4 treatments of carboplatin, the lung mets showed up. It felt like everything that I had done up to that point was not going to work. So then you start searching, and I searched. First of all, Ohio State University had a clinical trial going on with what was called PAC-1. It was a drug, pretty powerful drug, because for me to handle it, I had to use gloves. And then the next week, I would take him up to Ohio State, and they would give him another infusion of chemo. So we did this 8 weeks in a row of alternating the chemo and then the drug. All through that, the lung met kept growing, and that's when I searched. And I had started communicating with Dr. Mamula. He's the most compassionate person there is. He's had a dog go through this, and he is searching in every way possible to save our dogs. So I called him, and I did not think it was going to be possible. He had already been through a clinical trial, and normally that would have excluded him for anything else, for anything scientific. And Mark said, we would love to have Ranger in this trial. We are especially interested in dogs with lung mets. In November of 2019, I took him to my vet to get the vaccines. He had a shot the first week of November and then in the third. Month later, his lungs were checked and the lung met had stopped growing. And in 2 more months, the lung met was gone. It was completely gone. I got another 3.5 years with Ranger. I had to put him down just in January. Still tough. But because of the vaccine, which I am a wholehearted believer in, I'm a believer in Mark, it gave me 3.5 more years with a wonderful dog. And I think that you all are searching for the right way. Dr. Tripp, I greatly appreciate you being a participant. I hope that everybody will be a participant and that this Mark's development of this vaccine will be widely available to everybody as a possible therapy. So that's my story, and it gives hope, I think, to everybody. And I can tell you right now, Mark has worked overtime, unbelievably hard, gone through all kinds of hurdles and roadblocks to get this done. And to his honor, and that he keeps at it, and he's fighting for you and your dogs. And Mark, I greatly appreciate that.
Rick, that was perfect. Compelling story, of course. You've become a good friend. Of course, over the years, we've both you and I and Mary and many of us here have had unfortunately, many of the same experience in having lost our pups from cancer. Like to think it makes us stronger, makes me work harder. But probably more important for me in having developed this therapy is I've also obviously been a patient, had a dog as a patient with this terrible syndrome, cancer, of course. I'll assume some of you know about our work, some of the details, but I'll speak to those of you who may be new to what our therapy is. I'll only provide really brief summary of what the therapy is. If you would like fine detail, there's a publication that our group at Yale University had published about a year or so ago now that will give you or bore you with much of the very fine detail in this therapy. Simply put, this at its fundamental level, this is a therapeutic vaccination strategy. It is composed, the vaccine, which is much like any other human or even canine vaccine. It's a simple subcutaneous vaccination and a booster vaccination 3 weeks later. Subcutaneous between the shoulder blades. The premise or the strategy here is to develop an immune response, antibodies in particular, and also another bone marrow cell called T cells that are directed against, that attack the proteins that attack the tumor cells themselves. So the very simple biology here is that an immune response to the tumor will prevent growth of the tumor, will prevent signaling pathways that find their way to the tumor that typically cause the tumor to grow and divide. It helps block those pathways, and hopefully it even can or will eliminate tumor cells. This is based on successful human therapies, notably things you might find in the public domain called Herceptin or Erbitux. These are what are called monoclonal antibodies that are successfully used in many human cancers. These are antibodies that our therapy tries to emulate by natural vaccination. And in fact, we've now shown and published those comparisons in a recent paper. So we're really making use of medical science that has been forged by other research groups in developing this therapy for dogs. It, much like any other vaccination strategy, the outcomes or the effects are not immediate. The therapy relies on the dog making antibodies, just like in humans, if you get a vaccination, whether it's measles, mumps, COVID, it will take, on the average, 2 to 3 weeks for you to make an immune response, antibodies in particular, to that vaccine. Such is the case in this therapeutic vaccination in dogs. We can measure antibody responses to the tumor proteins that arise over about 3 weeks. They continue to expand and get larger over the successive 3 or 4 weeks after that, and then plateau and will largely remain elevated for almost a year in our studies. Again, the goals of our therapy, as you can imagine, are to either slow tumor growth or stop it, even better, or the best outcome, of course, is in reversing or eliminating tumors from the dog. We've had all 3 of those outcomes that we've observed in patients of ours. I will say up front, I don't try to sell this as a therapy that will necessarily be successful in every dog. Dog tumors, even the same kind of tumor in individual dogs, can grow very differently. And this is true in human cancers as well. There is not one therapy, as we all know, in human cancers that are effective in the same cancer in every patient. And that is the case, of course, in dogs as well. I oftentimes, well, the most often asked questions are, how will this work in my dog? with osteosarcoma or hemangio or a number of other appropriate tumor types? And how soon will I see improvement? Again, as I mentioned, it's not an immediate therapy. It will take several weeks to develop antibodies. Those antibodies hopefully find their way to the tumor and start to be effective. We see a range of responses in terms of timing. Some dogs may have objective responses after 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. Some take longer. And of course, some dogs honestly don't respond at all, in part because there are factors about the tumor that allow the tumor to survive, simply put. Cancer, as I am constantly reminded to tell people, is a very dynamic disease. It's a changing disease over time. It's not one cancer cell that divides and makes identical cancer cells that grow into a large tumor. Tumors want to survive. They don't want to be killed by chemotherapies or by immune therapies, such as our vaccination. They mutate. So it's a very dynamic process. It changes over time, so it can better survive, it being the cancer. So it's a constant war, a battle, if you will, in how our immune therapy can potentially eliminate new mutated cancer cells over time. With that, I'll just tell you that at the moment, our therapy is offered at Dr. Chelsea Tripp's clinic, the Bridge Animal Resource Center in Seattle. She'll talk to you here in a minute. It is also available at the University of Washington by Dr. Rance Sellen, and hopefully in a few other places in the coming days. And with that, I'll turn the microphone over to you, Dr. Tripp.
Sure. Rance would kill me if I didn't correct you, but it's Washington State University where he's at. University of Washington is just down the road from me. So he's closer to Idaho in that area of the state. I was actually part of the original Listeria vaccine that has been on the marketplace a couple of years ago for immunotherapy. And so we've been very focused on trying to add immunotherapy as the next pillar of care for our cancer patients. And that's probably a really good segue to what Mark is saying, in the fact that immunotherapy is going to be another strategy. It's not probably going to be the end-all be-all answer to curing cancer, but we need to use it still with surgery. We need to use it still with radiation. We need to use it with chemotherapy. And one of the things we learned quite a bit in that original clinical trial was the earlier the better for immunotherapy, because ultimately the immune system needs time to take up that signal and to be able to promote the right cells to start to recruit to the tumor, whether it's the primary tumor or metastasis. So it's really important for us to try to plan in advance of when we're going to do this, rather than be looking at doing it late stage in the disease, because then we're a little bit behind. By the time the tumor has learned to get into other tissues, then you're fighting on multiple fronts on a war. Okay. So the more we can early diagnose our pets, the more we can get them heading in the right direction with immunotherapy, I think we're going to do better with their longevity and their responses. The cool part about this vaccine is what it targets, and the EGFR vaccine and the EGFR family of proteins and receptors has a lot of crossover in cancer. There's a lot of different tumor types that actually have the EGFR pathways intact, mutated, or upregulated, which make it for nice targets. And I do think that there's also going to be translation to how this works in people, because dogs are a really strong model for how we are going to treat cancer in humans. So ultimately, I think what we're trying to learn in the dogs is also going to help translate on the human side, and hopefully everybody can be used or benefit from this vaccine. We still recommend standard of care on these guys, and that is again a first discussion of osteosarcoma kiddos is surgery or no surgery. Okay, if they don't have surgery, they can still have the vaccine, but we do want to still maintain pain management for those kiddos, whether you are using it with radiation or bisphosphonates or oral pain meds and things. And so ultimately, making good decisions on what is right for your pet and what is right for your family and their lifestyle is really important. But the vaccine can play a role in that care. And it is 2 injections, 3 weeks apart. We know that people are traveling a very long distance to come see us. And so we are trying to make sure that you have your established care in your area with your oncologist. And we will see you for a recheck, go over the vaccine, get you the vaccine, and the next appointment's literally just a tech appointment to get that next vaccine and get you back home. So as soon as we can get other locations up and running, we will, but it does take some time to get signed off on for handling biologics and things like that, like this, and to know the study protocol. So.
Our role here is primarily going to be to serve a population of dogs that, for any number of reasons, are probably not going to get amputation and chemotherapy. We are one of the, in fact, I think right now we are the only facility in the state of Washington that can offer radiation therapy. There is a facility in Oregon, but with limited radiation therapy facilities in the Pacific Northwest, we have a really busy radiation therapy service. And one of the alternatives to the treatment of osteosarcoma dogs, alternatives to amputation and chemotherapy, is what's often referred to as palliative radiation therapy. The palliative radiation therapy is directed at the primary tumor site, and it is very effective at alleviating pain in these dogs. We often add another drug, a bisphosphonate called zoledronate, which has a bit of evidence to suggest that it can, in some dogs, help with pain management, may have some, and I emphasize may have some anti-tumor benefits. So our population of dogs enrolled in the trial are predominantly those that are getting radiation therapy because, again, for a number of reasons, they're not candidates for amputation and chemotherapy. Because of university regulations, what's called IACUC, Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, we can actually offer the vaccine to 2 populations of dogs. That is, dogs that have been referred to us for palliative radiation therapy, or dogs that get limb amputation and chemotherapy. Our protocol says that dogs have to be treated with quote standard treatment, and the standard treatments for osteosarcoma, as has been alluded to, are limb amputation and chemotherapy or palliative radiation therapy. Because we are a university, and when one is dealing with things that are under the umbrella of what is called intellectual property, this would be Dr. Mamula's intellectual property, attorneys get involved. And as a result of that, we have what's called a materials transfer agreement, which says essentially that the vaccine has to be administered under, I'm going to say, my direct supervision. I don't have to be the one to administer it, but vaccines have to be administered here at WSU, which means that for people who come here for palliative radiation therapy and get the vaccine, they are obligated to come back 21 days later for the second vaccine. We can't send a dose of vaccine to their veterinarian to administer closer to home. That would violate our materials transfer agreement and could get us into potential legal difficulties with universities. So that's the basic overview of what WSU can do. We are actively enrolling patients. We just gave a patient a first dose of a vaccine on the heels of palliative radiation therapy yesterday. And I think, Mark, we've got in the last 2 weeks, I think we've added another three or four dogs that were sent here for radiation therapy. So we will see how things play out with them. I want to reiterate everything that has been said and maybe expand just a little bit. There's no guarantees of response to therapy. And part of the reason for that has already been alluded to, but I'm going to take another stab at it here. We're dealing with two dynamic populations. We're dealing with the dynamic population that represents the dogs getting the vaccines. And when I talk to students about immunotherapy, I basically have them go back and tax them to recall some very basics of immunology. And that is that all immune responses are genetically dictated. So a dog that doesn't have the appropriate genes to mount appropriate immune responses is not necessarily going to benefit from the vaccine, as Mark has already alluded to. And because of the what's often referred to as dichotomy, the split, if you will, in the immune response, the antibody responses or the T cell or the cell-mediated immune responses, a dog could have a really robust antibody response, but have a less impressive T cell response. And if they don't have a good T cell response, then their ability to control or kill tumor cells may not be as good as one hoped for. Then we have the tumor, as Mark has already alluded to as well. Tumors are very dynamic things. And I tell clients all the time that when dealing with a metastatic tumor like osteosarcoma, the cells that set up sites in the lungs or any of the places that osteosarcoma can go, while it's the same tumor type, it's not realistic to expect that they are identical to the parent tumor. The fact that they can live in these new places makes them different. And as a result of that, it's often referred to as plasticity, as a result of that ability to change over time.
I just booked an appointment
The expectations
for the
that
29th.
the vaccine
I have a
will
booking number.
be a benefit to all
And it
patients in all
didn't give me a
situations
chance
is probably
to
not realistic.
choose what.
I see some questions on some other tumor types. So osteosarcoma and hemangiosarcoma are our go-tos at my location. But ultimately, we do have some carcinomas that we are able to treat as well, specifically UC or TCC, transitional cell carcinoma or urothelial carcinoma, as it's been renamed, has very high EGFR expression as well. So I have had a handful of those other types of tumors. The majority of what we've been treating so far has been osteosarcoma and hemangiosarcoma kiddos. And again, we started with this trial around Thanksgiving. So we're still very early in the process of being able to look at those dogs and seeing how they're doing clinically. But I think it's very promising as an adjunct for UC TCC cases as well as the hemangio kiddos. And we are trying to get you in as quick as possible. As you can imagine, getting anywhere in veterinary medicine right now is challenging from a caseload standpoint for ERs and specialty centers, and even your GPs are refusing to take new exams and things like that. So we do recommend you give us a call, and we try to work with you to try to get you in as quick as possible based on what's going on with your kiddo and when surgery's happening and things like that.
For dogs at WSU to be eligible for the vaccine, we do have to have at least a cytologic diagnosis consistent with osteosarcoma. There's, depending upon the paper that you read, roughly 5 to 10 of every 100 dogs that has a bone lesion that looks like osteosarcoma will have a different tumor type. And so we want to make sure that we're giving the vaccine to the right dogs for the right reasons. And aspiration cytology of the bone lesions is a fairly simple and straightforward procedure. It's not recognized to increase the risk of pathologic fractures, And we find that we are often able to get a cytologic diagnosis suggestive of or consistent with osteosarcoma based on something as non-invasive as a bone aspirate using a simple injection needle. Our IACUC approval, our IACUC protocol right now mandates that we only give the vaccine to osteosarcoma bearing dogs. And even with that, dogs with appendicular osteosarcoma and not osteosarcoma of what's often referred to as the axial skeleton, things like the skull or the shoulder blades or the spine or the pelvis bones. Our IACUC approval is only for appendicular osteosarcoma in dogs, which represent the vast majority of osteosarcoma bearing dogs anyway, and they reflect the majority of what we see here at our hospital.